Okay, now that we have somewhat of an idea of what process costing is, which is just tracking the costs of a department for a period of time and then determining what the per unit cost was of everything they produced that came off that process, both finished and still in process. But we have to convert the still in process to equivalent whole units so we can add them all together. Probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense yet, but I wanted to go through the example that's here in the book, and we'll talk about what that is, so how that works. Now, this is a four-step process. We're going to talk about the 4 steps in doing the month-end allocation of costs, which we'll see. I'll lay out exactly what it is that we're trying to do. But we follow these 4 steps, and they are: we need to determine the physical flow of units. Second, compute the units of production, the equivalent units of production. Third, come up with a per unit cost. And then 4, using those per unit costs, assign those costs to the units completed and the ones that are still in process. So we're going to start with the example that's here in the book. We're going to go through this, and I'm going to show you exactly how that works. So I'm going to drop down to a piece of paper here real quick. Now here's my work in process account for the month. Okay, work in process. Now at the beginning of the month, I'm going to say that we came in, it's January 1st, and last night, December 31st, we turned off the conveyor belt, or the assembly line, and it still had some units on it that we needed to finish this year. So in January, if you can imagine this, the first thing we're going to do is finish those units that are on the assembly line, and then we're going to start and finish a whole bunch more during January. So this is the work in process account, and I'm going to say that it currently has beginning inventory. And so it's got costs in it already from last month, from December, but they're not done yet. And the costs in them right now are $81,000 of materials, and these are just a carryover from last month. And if you wonder, well, where do I get that from? Well, they've got to give us this, and of course we're going to calculate the end of this month's ending work in process, and that'll be next month's beginning. So this month's beginning is always last month's ending, which we calculated at that point in time. Labor was $49,500, and factory overhead is applied at the rate of 120% of direct labor, which was $59,400. So total cost of beginning inventory is $189,900. That's the cost of beginning inventory. That's the beginning balance in work in process on January 1st. Now, we also know that this cost is for 30,000 units that are only partially completed. So I came in here, turned on the lights on January 1st, and I can see 30,000 units there that are not done yet. And so far, to get them to where they are right now, cost $81,000 in materials, $49,500 in labor, and $59,400 in factory overhead. So far they've got costs of $189,900. And this month, the first thing I'm going to do is finish those up and get them out of here, and then do a whole bunch more. So I go to work. I actually go to work. Now during the month, I need to go get direct materials, more direct materials to start more units. And I'm going to incur direct labor to finish these up and start a whole bunch more. And I'm also going to apply factory overhead. So how much is that going to be? Okay, well, material requisition slips. We're going to go check the material requisition slips, and we're going to see how much this department requisitioned in direct materials. And records show that they went and got 279,000 more of materials. We're going to analyze the labor, and we're going to see that the direct labor of people working in this department for the month turned out to be 171,000. And then factory overhead that we're going to apply at 120% of that is 120% of 171 is 205,200. So of course this was the beginning balance. We're going to make an entry to debit work in process for 279,000 and credit raw materials, because that's what material requisition slips show. We're going to debit this work in process account for 171,000 and credit factory payroll payable. And we're going to debit work in process for the 205,200, which is 120% of direct labor, and credit factory overhead. That's going to give us here a total balance of this account and let me make sure I don't want to make any mistakes, because if it doesn't come out and it's due to a math error, it's just going to slow us down. I don't know if I did that right or not. Yeah, so I'm adding the beginning inventory, the costs that were here from last month that are still here because they're not done, plus what I added in the 3 product costs, 3 manufacturing costs, gives me a total here at the end of the month of $845,100. That's this, 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 and this. And of course this is these 3 added up. $845,100. Of course, we're keeping track of production records as well. And production shows that we actually, let's see here, we actually have, we finished a whole lot of units. We completed a lot of units. And how many units did we actually finish? We finished 100,000 units that are done. And ending work in process, there's 20,000 units still here. 20,000 units still here. So how many units did I actually begin? Now all of these problems, and I think it's probably just to make sure that we understand how this works. If I started with 30,000 units, and then I began a certain number finished 100,000, but still have 20,000, how many did I actually start this period? Well, you can logically reason it out, but a quick way to do it is that what you started with plus what you actually began, that has to total the same amount as what you finished and what is still here. So notice that I finished 100,000 and there's still 20,000 here, so I have 120,000. Where'd they come from? Well, 30,000 was here when I started, and so I actually began 90,000 units. Now these homework problems will give us they'll give us 3 of these 4 numbers, and we have to figure out the 4th one. It could be something like this. They could say, well, I started with 10,000. I actually began 150,000 more. I finished 130,000. Now those are done. So how many are still here in ending inventory? Well, this is the easy one. If I started with 10, and I started a brand new 150,000, that's 160,000 units. I finished 130, so there should be 30,000 still here. Let's do another one. How about if I say that I started with 20,000, I actually started another 250. I don't know how many I finished, but there are 50 still here. How many did I finish? Well, we can figure it out. 20 plus the 250 is 270. There are 270,000 that I either started with or began brand new, 270. I still have 50 of them, so how many did I finish? Has to be 220. We could have one that looks like this. I actually started 100,000. I finished 90, and I still have 20. How many did I begin with? Well, again, this one's probably not quite as easy to figure out, but just recognize that these have to total the same as these. These total 110, so these have to total 110. And if 100,000 is what I actually started this month, then 10,000 is what I must have started with. Now let's see if it makes sense. I started with 10,000 units. I actually began another 100, so there's 110,000. I finished 90, so there should be 20,000 still here. Yeah. So again, they'll give us, it's always, what did you start with? What did you actually start? What did you finish? And what do you still have in ending inventory? If we have 3 of those numbers, we can get the 4th one. And they usually, they make us get the 4th one. So, in this case, now, here's what we're looking at. Here's our problem, is I know that I started with 30,000 units that were not quite done yet. And they already had costs of 189,900 in them. I began brand new another 90,000 units, and I went and got materials of 279,000, labor incurred of 171, and factory overhead applied of 205,200. So I've got total cost here of 845,100. I know I finished 100,000 units, and I still have 20,000 units here partially complete. Well, I need to figure out, what did these units cost? What did they cost? And so of this total cost, how much of it should I assign to the units that are gone and journal out, and how much of it should I leave here as the cost of those units that are still in ending work in process? Now, if there were no units in ending work in process, there were none unfinished, well, I would transfer it all out, because there's zero cost, 0 units, 0 cost, but there are still some units there. So what do you think? I mean, 100,000 gone, 20,000 still here. Should I just assign $800,000 to the units gone and the 45,100 to the units still here? Is that close enough? The answer is no. We can figure it out. And this is where we're going to go through this 4-step process to determining how much of this 845,100, how much of it is the cost of those that are gone, which need to be transferred to the next department or finished goods if I'm the last department, and how much of it is going to stay here to start next month, to be finished up next month. So almost seems like an impossible task, I know. But the key to this, like every other chapter in this text, is organization. We just need to know how to organize the data, organize the information so I can see what's going on. So I've developed, and the book does not do a good job of doing this, but at the end of every month, we've got to put together a report. And this report is called, let me make sure I get the name right. Different books call it different things. It's called I think it's called a process cost summary. It's called a process cost summary, which is going to do all these computations for me. Now, here's what the process cost summary looks like in the textbook. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can see what this process cost summary looks like. Here's what it is. This is a little bit further, this is pretty close to the end of the text. Look at that. That is it's kind of ugly. I know, it is. So I have actually, before we started using this text, I devised another way to do this. It's essentially the same information, Just it's easier to see and better organized, and it goes through the 4 steps. So let's do that. So a process cost summary is going to look something like this. Whoops, what am I doing? That's supposed to be on this side. I have a big jar of M&Ms that I use to try to steady the camera. Put it over here instead of on the other side. Okay. So here's what I want to do. I want to start with, it looks like a T account, but it's not quite a T account. I'm going to start with my numbers right here. And now this is my process cost summary. And it could be for the, I'll just call it the assembly department, whatever this department is. Assembly department. And this is for, the month of, and in the book here, I'm using the book that's the example that's in the book, April 2017. And I'm going to make it look like a T account, but it's not quite a T account. Just makes it, but T accounts are multi-beneficial, certainly. And here's what we've got. We've got beginning inventory, which is made up of, I made that actually a little bit too long. I'm going to need some room down here to work. Direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. And it is 81. Let me put these over this way. I'm just dropping these numbers right here. Dropping the numbers we were working with. Factory overhead for a total of $189,900. So that was my beginning inventory. Then I added direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead of $279, $171, $205. We're going to do this. I'm going to do this in a couple, 3 videos, so this isn't the only time you're going to see it. Let me add up my current production costs. These guys, currently I added $655, $200 for total costs of $845, $100. All I did was I just put those very same numbers right there. And now I want to determine what's the cost of the units I finished and what are the costs of the units that are still here. Okay, now the textbook, as I mentioned earlier, has a 4-step process for doing this, 4-step process. And we're going to go through them. The first step is determine the physical flow of units. That's what they say. Determine the physical flow. We just need to get a handle on those 4 gauges of units that we were talking about. So I need to know units. Units and units. These are the 4 things I'm looking for. How many units were in beginning inventory? How many units did I actually start? How many units, now these are completed. How many units did I finish? And how many units are in ending inventory? Ending inventory. Now this side is kind of called, this side is the to account for. To account for. And this is actually accounted for. Accounted for. So I've got a certain a number of units that I began with this month that had a cost. I started a whole bunch more and added more costs, and I want to know. That's what I have to account for. I have to account for these costs and these units. And I'm going to account for them here. I'm going to say, well, these costs are going to be assigned to the ones that are gone, and the rest is going to be to ending inventory. And these units, well, where are they now? Well, they're either gone or they're still here. So step one is to get a handle on the physical units. Don't even worry about the dollars and cents right now. What we're concerned with at this point in the game is just the physical units. Where are the physical units? And that's this right here. Number one. These two columns are step one. And they've got to total up to the exact same amount. You've got to total up to the same amount. And the problems have to give us 3 of the 4. They can give us all 4, but most of them just give us 3. Now, what did this problem tell us? Well, it did tell us that there were 30,000 units in beginning inventory. It did tell us that I completed 100,000 units and that there were still 20,000 units here. Still that 20,000 units. Now remember I said that the easy way to get to calculate the fourth one is just knowing that beginning inventory plus what I started has to total up what I completed and what's still in ending inventory. Well, that's exactly what we're doing here. What I started with plus what I began has got to equal what I finished and what's still here. So I know that this side adds down. Oh, this is 120,000 units I can account for. I finished 100,000 and there's still 20,000 here. So there's 120,000 physical units. Of those 120,000, 30,000 of them were here to start with. How many did I actually begin? I must have began 90 to get that 120,000. And this is just in terms of units. Now I'm gonna highlight these two numbers because this whole thing is like a big balancing mechanism. These have to match. That was step one. Just get a handle on how many units did you start with, how many did you actually begin, so therefore you better know where 120,000 units are. We have to account for 120,000 units. Where are they? Well, I'm accounting for them in the fact that 100,000 are gone and 20,000 are still here. I've got them all accounted for. Excellent. Okay, so that was step one. Now, step two is to compute the equivalent units of production. Equivalent units of production. And equivalent units of production this is where production is. Completed and still here. We don't look on this side because these were produced, a portion of these were produced last year. Now, equivalent units of production are over here. I want to know what were my equivalent units. I finished 100,000 units and I still have 20,000 that are partially complete. So I want to compute equivalent units of production. But as a little twist in this problem, we are going to compute that equivalent units of production for direct materials and another one for conversion costs. And what are my conversion costs? These, direct labor and factory overhead, are my conversion costs. They are the costs that I incur to convert materials into a finished product. Here, these are also conversion costs. These are just carryover conversion costs from last month. These are the current month's conversion costs. Now, the reason I calculate a different equivalent units of production for materials as opposed to conversion costs is for this reason. We're going to assume that conversion costs are added evenly throughout the process of producing a product. So it may take, I'm just going to say it's going to take a product starting at the 0% complete. It's just a pile of raw materials. We go get a bunch of raw materials, and it's just a pile of raw materials. and we're going to assume for all of our homework problems and everything in this chapter, we're going to assume that conversion costs are incurred uniformly all the way through the 100% completion point, where we have completely converted that pile of raw materials into a sellable packaged product. So if a particular product is at the 70% point, well, it's incurred 70% of its conversion costs. If it's at the 20% point, well, it's incurred 20% of its conversion costs. It's 20% converted. So that's going to make it easy. Conversion costs are assumed converted uniformly, but direct materials are not added uniformly throughout a process. Think about this logically. If we start off with just a glump of plastic, we go get a 10 pounds of plastic and boom, and then we spend the rest of the time shaping, heating, molding, and smoothing out and sanding that plastic, and when we get to the end of that process, we still have 10 pounds of plastic. It's just nice and shaped and smoothed out. Where does as far as material costs, direct material costs, where does a product get its direct material costs? And for most of our problems, they're right at the beginning. Direct materials are added right at the beginning, and we spend the rest of the time converting. So if we have a product that's right here at the 20% point, we also have one here at the 80% point. Almost. I'm going to put one at the 50% point. One at the 50%, starting to take shape. Now, we start off with a product, and it's 20% complete. How much of its materials that it's going to have by the time it gets to the end, how much does it have already? And the answer is all of them. All of them. Materials are added right at the beginning of the process. So could I say that the cost of materials of something at the 20% point, it has the same amount of materials as at the 80% point? We could, if materials are added at the beginning of the process. They have the same material costs. They are complete with regard to their materials. In this case, the material costs are added right at the beginning. Right when we start the product, it's got all of its material costs. It is a complete whole unit with regard to material costs. It just doesn't have all of its conversion costs yet. So as far as a unit that is at the 20% point, how complete is it with regard to materials? 100% complete. It's got them all. How complete is it with regard to conversion costs? 20%. It's only got 20% converted. How about a unit at the 50% point? How complete is it with regard to materials? 100% complete. They're added right there. How complete are they with regard to conversion costs? Only 50%. Let me take these even way up here to not 80%. We got a unit that's 80% complete. How complete is it with regard to direct materials? 100% complete. It got them all at the beginning. It's only 80% complete with regard to conversion costs. Let's do one where the materials are added at the end. Maybe this process is one where we spend the time it comes in for packaging or something, and so we spend time leveling and stacking and get it on a pallet, and the direct materials are added right at the end, which is maybe it's a shrink wrap. We're going to shrink wrap it all up at the end, and then it goes away. And that gets added right at the end. So it does not get any materials until it's added at the end. So if I have some products here that are at the 40% point, 40% through this process, how complete are they with regard to materials? 0. They haven't reached a point where they get any materials yet. How complete are they with regard to conversion costs? 40%. How about one that's right here at the 75%? It's 75% leveled and stacked. And how complete are they with regard to materials? 0. It hasn't reached that point yet. How complete are they with regard to conversion costs? 75%. Yeah. So the problems have to tell us, where are materials added, so I know how complete they are with regard to materials. Conversion costs are always assumed added uniformly. Let me do another one real quick just to kind of show you this. How about if we have another process where maybe materials are added right here at the 60% point. A product comes in and our job is to paint it. So we spend the first 60% of the time just sanding it and getting all the dust off of it and getting ready. And then right here we paint it. That's where it gets all its materials. And the rest of the time we spend drying it and then shining it up, buffing it out. And then it's done. So if we have a product that's right here at the 50% point, it's at the 50% point, it's getting pretty close to where it's going to get painted. How complete is it with regard to the materials of our department? 0. It has not reached that point yet. It has no material cost yet. But it is 50% complete with regard to conversion costs, isn't it? How about one that's right here at the 70% point? How complete is it with regard to materials? 100% complete. It's for materials, it's 100%. It got all of its materials. A product that's at the 70% point has passed the point. It's got all the materials it's going to get. It's complete with regard to materials. But it's only 70% complete with regard to conversion costs. So in terms of materials and conversion costs, they can be at a different stage of completion. So in this case, we need to know, where are materials added in this process? And in this process, let me look it up. In this process, materials are added at the beginning of the process. So now, again, remember in computing equivalent units of production, I'm actually figuring out converting the units completed and the units still here into equivalent units of production. Well, obviously, units that are complete, these are done and gone, so they do represent 100,000 units with regard to materials and 100,000 with regard to conversion costs. Not only do they represent them, they are them. They are totally done. But ending inventory, in terms of direct materials, how complete are they? Well, we said that the materials are added at the beginning of the process, and just by virtue of the fact that they're in process, they have got all their materials from my department, 100% complete with regard to materials. How complete are they with regard to conversion costs? And the problem told us they were 25% complete. 25% complete. So again, this is a process where materials are added at the beginning of the process, and these 20,000 units are only a quarter of the way through, 25% complete. So they are 25% converted, but they do have all their materials already. So let's calculate out now these 20,000 units. How many units do they how many equivalent whole units do they represent with regard to direct material costs? 20,000. They have all their materials. But how many equivalent units of production do they represent with regard to conversion costs? Well, they're only 25% complete, so 20,000 times 25% is only 5,000. See how that worked? Completed, you just transfer it over. But we have to know these 20,000, how complete are they with regard to materials, and multiply that percentage. And how complete are they with regard to conversion costs, and then multiply that percentage. Now let's add them up. These 120,000 units represent 120,000 units with regard to material costs, but they only represent 105,000 units with regard to conversion costs. This was step number 2. Taking the units completed and the ones still here and converting them to equivalent units of production. One for direct materials, one for conversion costs. We don't use these. We use these for equivalent units of production. So that was the second step. Now the third step is I have to compute the unit cost. So I'm going to put down here cost per unit. Cost per unit. So I want to know what the cost per equivalent unit was for direct materials and what the cost was for conversion costs. Per unit. Per unit. Well, here's what I'm going to do. Let's start with direct materials. And to calculate the per unit cost, we're just going to divide the cost by the number of units. Isn't that what per unit cost is? So for direct materials, what is the total direct material cost? It's right here. We are going to add in the beginning inventory. We started with 81,000 of direct materials, and we added 279,000 of direct materials. So that's 81,000 plus 279. That's a grand total of $360,000. And how many equivalent whole units did I produce for $360,000? It's right here. Direct materials, it's 120,000 units. That's $3 per unit. We just took the total direct material cost and divided by the equivalent units of production for direct materials, and it came out to $3 a piece. We're going to do the exact same thing with conversion costs. Here's my conversion costs in beginning inventory, and here's my conversion costs that I added. There they are. What do they add up to be? They add up to be 400, sharpen this a little, 485, 100, and I want to divide it by the equivalent units of production for conversion costs, which was 105,000. So I converted the equivalent of 105,000 units. And it cost me a total of 485,100 to do that. That works out to, let me see if this is going to work out right. Yeah, it works out to $4.62 per unit. Nice. So what did one whole unit cost to produce? $7.62. $3 for materials, $4.62 for the cost to convert it, labor and overhead. This was step number 3. Finally, step number 4 says using those costs, figure out how much the 100,000 units cost and how much the 20,000 units in ending inventory cost so far. So somehow what I'm trying to do is I'm saying I've got, here, let me do it this way. I'll do a pink one. I've got a total of $845,100. And my job is to do this. I've got to say how much of that $845,100 is the cost of the units completed and how much of it is for the units still in ending inventory. I'm just trying to allocate that cost. Isn't that what I was trying to do back here? This $845,100? How much am I going to journal out of here representing the cost of the 100,000, thereby leaving an amount for the cost of the 20,000 that are in ending inventory? That's what I'm trying to figure out. What's the cost of the 100,000 that were finished, and what's the cost of the 20,000 that were here? We are in the home stretch, and this, my friends, is the entire chapter. Okay, let's do the easy one first. We know that one whole unit costs $7.62. So therefore, how much did 100,000 units cost? $762,000. 100,000 at $7.62 a piece. Well, that looks pretty reasonable. That means that leaves about 80,000 for the units that are still here. But let's figure it out. Let's figure out what and make sure it works. Never want to plug in accounting. We want to calculate it and make sure it works. Otherwise, we won't catch our errors. So now, ending inventory. This is the hardest part of the whole thing too. But you can get it. I want to know these 20,000 units. How much material cost is in them? Direct material cost, and how much conversion cost is in them. Well, the easiest way to do it is this. Let's start with the direct material cost. One whole unit costs $3, has $3 of direct material cost in it. Let me say that again. One whole unit has $3 of direct material cost. How many whole units do these 20,000 units represent as far as direct materials go? 20,000, don't they? Don't they represent whole units? They do, because materials are added at the beginning of the process. So these 20,000 all have $3 of materials in them. They had it from the get-go. So the total material cost is 20,000. I'll do it like this. Or maybe I'll use green. I always kind of like to color code things, because we're talking green is for this. That's this. The direct material costs in these 20,000 units are at $3 for a whole unit. They represent 20,000 whole units. That's $60,000. Let's do the same thing for material costs. I want to know, or not material, conversion costs. What conversion costs are in these 20,000 units? Well, a whole unit has $4.62 of conversion costs for a whole unit. How many whole units do these 20,000 represent with regard to conversion costs? Only 5,000. So they should only have the equivalent of 5,000 whole unit cost. So 5,000 equivalent whole units at $4.62 a piece is $23,100. For a total cost in ending inventory of $83,100. So now what do these add up to? So if I said that the units completed, the 762,000, plus the cost I've calculated for ending inventory is $83,100, that adds up to $845,100. And yes, we have appropriately allocated our total cost to the units completed and the ones that are still here. So now I know, going back to this, now I know, oh, well, I need to make a journal entry to take the cost of the 100,000 units completed. I need to journal them out of here, and if I credit this account for 762,000, it's going to leave a balance of, yeah, you guessed it, 83,100. And this is our cost production report. It's got everything. It's got everything. It's got the units I started, or that I began with, and then the brand new units I started, how many I finished, how many are still here, how complete they are, my beginning costs, the costs I added, the unit costs for this production period, and therefore an allocation to the units completed and the ones still here. This was number 3. This was step number 4. So number 1, get a handle on just the physical units. Number 2, looking at the units completed and the ones still here, calculate equivalent units of production for materials and conversion costs. Using our total costs and our equivalent units of production, calculate the per unit cost. Then using that per unit cost, figure out what the units completed cost and what costs are still in ending inventory. And it is self-balancing. It is in fact self-balancing. Now what I've done, I'm gonna load another one of these. Probably today's what? Yeah, okay, I'll probably load one in a day or two, and it might already even be there by the time you're watching this, to do another one. But just to make life a little bit easier, I'm gonna load this on Canvas, but I use this. I actually created this, so it's just like a template, so I can just start dropping numbers in. You can see it's the same thing we did. It's the number one, I want to get a handle on the number of units, physical units. Make sure I know how many units I'm working with. And those two numbers got to balance. I'll drop in the costs, beginning inventory, and my costs this month. And what I'm trying to do, the whole purpose is to take these total costs, figure out how much the units completed cost, and how much of it is to ending inventory. So step one, get the handle on the physical units. Step two, using this, we're going to calculate equivalent units of production using the percentage complete. Step three, using the material cost as well as the manufacturer, or the material cost, the two material costs divided by the equivalent units gives us a per unit cost. Same thing, conversion cost divided by this will give me the cost per unit. And I know this is still fuzzy. We're going to go through it. We're going to go through it again and again, probably 3 or 4 more times. And then once I come up with this total, this is where most people get lost. We use this to then cost out the units that are gone and the ones that are still here. But this will make life easier for you. I'm going to load it on Canvas, and you can print out as many of them as you want. Just makes it easy to see where everything is. So with that, right now we're at about 47 minutes. This is the entire chapter. You have now seen the entire chapter. So I'm going to load another video. We're going to work out another problem, doing it again. The more you see it, the more it's going to make sense. I promise you. Just like everything in life, the more you see it, the simpler it becomes. So with that, read through the chapter. And now it'll maybe start to make a little bit more sense. Look for the next video, and we'll continue to practice this.